Have the Leafs lost the leverage in Tavares talks? And what's the latest with Nyes and Marner? Lots get into coming off a busy weekend. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Boy, it's a scorcher out there today, isn't it, buddy?
Oh, man. Just you step outside of your house, and it's just a wave of disgusting heat.
You're a puddle. You're a puddle. You're a puddle within 4 seconds of leaving your front door. Today's not a day where I'm doing any lawn maintenance. I can assure you that, Dave. Absolutely not. When we're done this pod, I'm going to go to the backyard and probably sit by the pool. That is the plan today for me. No, it's insane. You're either inside in the AC, or if you're lucky enough to have a pool in the backyard, that's where you got to be. It's a hot one. It's a scorching one, and it means that the off season is near, because that's what hockey off season's all about, right? It's the summer. It means that we're getting into the summer. I think we officially hit the summer over the weekend, actually. And it was a busy weekend in terms of news and notes around the NHL. A couple of trades, a couple of signings, some re-signings. So things are moving and shaking around the league as we approach the draft coming up later this week. You got the free agency early next week on July 1st. But still really no concrete anything out of Toronto, like no signings, no trades, no nothing out of the Maple Leafs. Meanwhile, the rest of the league seems to be getting some stuff done, eh?
Yeah, it's a familiar feeling, because you just like, why didn't the Leafs do that? Like, Leafs should be in on that. Why?
Right?
So there's always is like a lot of that. Like, we have to remember the Leafs have literally hardly any draft assets.
Mm-hmm.
Players that they do maybe want to trade, they don't have a lot of options because there's trade protection involved, and it's one obstacle that's kind of sometimes not always, sometimes tough to overcome.
There are ridiculous players with no trade protection. Like the fact that I think Domi has no trade protection. David Kampf has no trade protection for some reason. And does Reeves have no trade protection? I think Reeves might have some like a limited no trade clause. It's like a bunch of bottom of the end roster guys who, for whatever reason, have no trade protection, and it's like completely hamstringing the Maple Leafs into making any of these depth maneuvers, like a Mason Marchment-esque maneuver where other teams are trying to clear out some cap space, but not really able to do that for the Maple Leafs because, well, they need to get the sign off from a lot of these guys.
Don't see any trade protection for Reeves.
Maybe it fell off on Reeves or something.
Yeah,
I feel like there's another depth player. Oh, Yarncroc. I think maybe it's Calle Yarncroc.
So the forwards that have it: Matthews, Nylander, Domi, Kampf, Yarncroc. Everyone on the blue line except for Simon Benoit and Anthony Stolarz.
It's just everyone has no trade protection. It's insane. It really, really does hamstring the Maple Leafs when they're trying to make some trades here and some deals ahead of July 1. Like we saw Trevor Zegras get dealt, and not a very large return, like a second and a fourth round pick, and then they sent over Ryan Poehling, which is fourth line center. Like he's just a prop. A player realistically to make the money work, took on another contract. It's like maybe he could play third line minutes in Anaheim, but on a serious contender, he's a 4C. So basically a second to fourth round pick, and they just kind of swap money for Trevor Zegras. Like Leafs couldn't have been in on that. Leafs couldn't have had some interest. Now I'll say this: I'm not sure if I really care much for Zegras. I don't know if that's necessarily a good fit here in Toronto with the coaching staff. It seems as though the defensive side of his game really lacks. But, the Mason Marchment one was a trade that a lot of people felt that Toronto could have been in on. Apparently they were in on it but again, don't have the assets to make it work. And it goes back to like those no trade clauses. If they could trade some of those guys for just picks, like they would have a couple more picks to deal in trades like that for like a Mason Marchment-esque player. But they just don't.
Yeah. No, they don't. And that's always the tough part about this is that with all these all-in trades, like not even this past season, but like 2 seasons ago, right, when they made the big push and they traded almost like half their roster and brought in like 4 or 5 new guys.
Yeah.
That was a very expensive trade deadline in terms of draft picks, some assets that they trade away. Like you can only do it so many times before you realize, oh, yes, we can't do anything else now.
We got nothing. And that's kind of where they're at. And, the players who they find are a little bit expendable, have either no trade clauses or the contracts aren't great and they're more cap dumps than they are, actual assets. So the Leafs, it's not an easy place to be if you're Brad Treliving. You're trying to work the phones in the trade market. So, and that's ultimately like when we break down today, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with the Leafs UFAs and John Tavares is a very interesting player right now, like for the Maple Leafs, because you look at free agency, there's no Tavares replacement. Like it's likely Sam Bennett returns to Toronto or returns to Florida, and then after that, like Mikael Granlund is the next best option. After that, Pia Suter, and then it really drops off from there. And if you're going to give one of those guys $5 million, which is what it'll probably take to sign one of those two, like what's the point? You know what I mean? Like at that point, you might as well bring back a Tavares, unless you're going to try and enter the chat of the trade market. But as we just mentioned, there ain't nothing to trade. Like, what did the Maple Leafs really have to trade to replace John Tavares? Like, there's really nothing. I feel like the Maple Leafs have really lost leverage here in Tavares talks. And I think that they have no choice here, but they got to bring back Tavares at this point. A lot of other guys are flying off the board that could have been replacements, and it's really gotten to a point where there is no better option available to the Maple Leafs at 2C this season than John Tavares, and they gotta get something done now. And I think hopefully it happens.
Yeah, I hope so. And this is why when you look at especially like the Marner stuff, right? When you lose a player like that and you get nothing back, it's like that's where you get burned. When you constantly lose players that, I understand the Marner situation. This is not more so Brad Treliving's fault, more so past years where they hadn't really exactly managed the asset properly. Like at some point, you have to make the decision. Like Tampa's done this before in the past where they make decisions on, do we trade the draft capital or do we try to trade a prospect that maybe still has some intrigue for teams, right? Before they get to the point where it's like, well, now this guy is nowhere close to being an NHL. Like, look at the two guys, Roni Hirvonen and we brought up Topi Niemelä. Imagine a few years ago if maybe the Leafs dangled one of those two guys before they really, maybe people realize, maybe they're not NHL draft prospects, right? In that stage where maybe someone could still do something with their development. Those are assets that you could have used, didn't use, and now they're worth nothing to you.
Yeah, I think I saw Topi Niemelä actually signed a 1-year deal in Sweden today, so that's topical as well. But yeah, like could they have used one of those prospects to get themselves, instead of adding a 3rd-round pick, a future 3rd-round pick into the deal? Could they have added like a Topi Niemelä or a Roni Hirvonen instead? Potentially, but obviously, didn't happen, and those prospects haven't panned out yet. Neither are with the organization anymore. Realistically, I think they still technically own their rights as they're both in Sweden, but or maybe Hirvonen may have went to Finland. But either way, you're completely right. I thought let's take a break. Like we're running a bit long. Let's take a break. Let's come back. Let's get a little bit deeper into the Tavares situation, though, because there were a couple of reports from both David Pagnotta and Pierre LeBrun about where the Leafs and Tavares things stand. LeBrun also wrote about Mitch Marner and his situation this summer, and some kind of surprising news coming out from the Marner camp as well. So we'll get into that more next on the Locked On at Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, give you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feeling fuller longer. And if you're a big fan of a grab-and-go snack that doesn't have a lot of mass, whether it's at your desk or on a road trip, go and get the no-shell variety. It's a great way to get a quick protein boost, and it's a go-to always for many people, including myself. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. So get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more.
The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you here on a scorching Monday in the city of Toronto. And there was some hot Leafs talk over the weekend as well. Pierre LeBrun wrote his rumblings piece. We had Pagnotta with his weekly weekend column as well, both of which including comments on both the Marner and Tavares situation. So let's kind of break them down one by one. We were talking about Tavares first, so we'll stick to the JT situation. So LeBrun had wrote that they're not particularly close on an extension quite yet, or more so that they're still trying to find the sweet spot with those two parties. So the Leafs trying to obviously get as low of an AAV as possible, and Tavares trying to get a fair deal, knowing what the market could be for a number 2 center out there, because he would be the top option if he hits free agency. I'm sure there'll be a team that will pay him very handsomely if that were to happen. And maybe Tavares, kind of pulls a stammer. There's 7 to 8 million probably waiting out there in the open market. Will he return to Toronto for cheaper is the big question. So interestingly, David Pagnotta, though, wrote in his piece that apparently, again, this is a report, but apparently the Maple Leafs, their latest offer, or their initial offer to John Tavares, was a 3-year deal at less than $4 million per. That seems like a bit of a slap in the face to John Tavares coming off a 38-goal season. Like, I know he wants to be here, and I know that, you think that gives you some sort of leverage, but a contract like that, I'm sorry, just seems like a bit of a joke if you're the Maple Leafs, and it would offend me if I were the Marner, if I was the Tavares camp.
It would be, because he's going to be taking no, he's not getting 11 anymore. But Brock Nelson signed for 7.5 over 3 years. Matt Duchene got 4.5 over 4 years.
In a no tax state, I might add.
And also getting a bit of buyout money, right?
Right.
On top of that. So, and Yanni Gord got how much again? 3x6 or something like that.
It was something cheap. It was like 2.8 million for like 6 years or something. But Yanni Gord to me isn't even in that conversation. Yanni Gord's like a 4th line center.
2.33, and we talk about. But that was more so a guy. Okay, we'll give you a long-term deal if you just take a really cheap value, right? For who he is. Let's not forget. We're not comparing Yanni Gord and John Tavares, but if you're the Leafs, you just gave Chris Tanev 6 years by 4.5, and then you come to John Tavares and say, "We're going to give you $4 million, but you scored 38 goals for us last year, and we're one of the better point producers, at least early on in the playoffs." I know round 2 didn't exactly go so well, but there was still some production there that some of the other guys did not give.
Still second on the team in scoring, scored more goals than Matthews, scored more goals than Marner last I checked. Tied with Nyes, only trailed Nylander in the scoring lead for the Leafs.
So I get you need to compromise, ask the guy to try to help a bit, but there's a difference between asking for help and saying we don't value like you did last year. And look, I get it. The whole point of contracts is you're not paying for what they have done in the past, but more so what you know what they're going to do or think they're going to do.
Right. And I don't know, like I think Tavares can age well. Like I don't think that he's going to completely fall off a cliff as quickly as some players have in the past. And a lot of players, it's because the speed, they lose out on their speed, and that's kind of where they start to falter a little bit. But Tavares has never relied on speed, right? He's always relied on positioning, work ethic, and in tight around the net. He can still do all of that, right? Like he still is strong on his skates, and he will be going forward. So that's why I'm not too worried about that. I think it was either Myrtle or Jonas Siegel wrote an article about him aging gracefully, and the likelihood of that happening in the Athletic. You guys go check that out. But I believe that if you give him like a 2, 3, 4 year deal, like he could still give you decent hockey. Like, is he going to be a 38 goal scorer for the next 4 years? No, probably not. But I think he could still, score you nearly 30 through the next couple of years, and maybe he's, a 20 to 25 guy in those final third and fourth year in the league potentially. I think that's very possible for him, as long as he still plays on the power play and gets some net front opportunities. He's still going to be that type of guy, and he fits Berube's system too. Like, you got to think of it that as well. Like, he really, really excelled in Berube's system this year, and I think he would moving forward. So to me, I think the Maple Leafs, they clearly have to find a sweet spot. Like, offering less than $4 million is a terrible starting point. That was never going to be the case, but obviously the Leafs can't afford to give him anywhere near the $7 million that Brock Nelson got. So hopefully they can find somewhere in the middle. I still think it probably lands around $5 million, maybe 5.5 on like a 4 or 5 year deal. Like, that's probably where it makes sense for both sides at that point. And then we can put this thing to bed, and the Maple Leafs will have a second line center next season. The other thing too, though, I will say this. I know I just advocated for him. It's like, how much longer will he be a second line center? We've already had the conversation for the last couple of years about potentially moving him off to the wing. So at that point, does that lose value? Is that why the Maple Leafs are thinking less than 4? Because at some point you'll be less valuable to us as a winger after this season. Is this going to be his last year where he can still play at a second line center level? Maybe it starts to drop off and they got to move him to the wing at that point. That's could be part of what they're evaluating and why they decided, less than 4 was the number that they wanted to offer. But I still think, the guy scored 38 goals this year, and I think he could probably still score 30 next year and maybe the year after. So at that rate, I think that'd be well worth paying him, an AAV in the 5s on like a 4 or 5 year deal to stretch that out so that, he could end up with around the same amount of money as Nelson, but just stretched over a longer period of time. And, it kind of works out for both sides. That's to me the sweet spot that makes the most sense.
Yeah. Like that at the end of the day, I think the Leafs are trying to push John Tavares to see how much he really wants to stay. But you got to walk that fine line, because Tampa did that same thing to Steven Stamkos.
Yep.
And he left. Now,
and Marchessault, same thing. Yeah. They offended him and he left.
So the one thing you don't want to do is say, "Oh, we lost John Tavares because we got a little too we pushed the line a little too much," right? And so I think the Leafs can't. I know that you can't try to lose every negotiation like everyone says they have done. I think they're trying to maybe change that narrative a little bit. But there's overcorrecting it as well. And I think maybe that could be the issue with Tavares right now.
Yeah. I just think they have no choice, though. Like, they got to get it done. There's no one in free agency, and they don't really have draft capital to replace him, and they don't have draft capital to even do the offer sheet. Like, they can't even go out and offer sheets. Like, there's not a whole lot of other options outside of signing John Tavares, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. And the money it's going to take to sign a Granlund or a Suter is pretty well what it's going to take to sign Tavares, most likely, if he takes, a bit of a haircut and a longer term deal to stick with Toronto. So it makes the most sense to get something done here. Hopefully it happens sooner rather than later, and they can kind of move on to the next order of business, which is, Matthew Nyes, some other UFAs that they've got that they need to get signed, and then look ahead to July 1 and whether or not to seize a hole that needs to be plugged or if they can move around and do some other stuff. One player that we are not expecting the Maple Leafs to offer a contract extension to is Mitch Marner. There was some news over the weekend about what his camp is hoping to do this summer. Let's get into that next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball, under the lights, golf's on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get into the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. If you're using FanDuel, you can track your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. You curious? You want to bet on where Mitch Marner lands? You can currently go to FanDuel under their novelty props app on the NHL section. You can bet Mitch Marner's next destination. The Maple Leafs currently 21-1. Very unlikely to happen. The Vegas Golden Knights are leading those odds, though. But if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can get a $5 bonus and or you can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Keep in mind, we are a year-long podcast, so just because the Leafs season is over and the NHL season is over, we are still here each and every day delivering the latest in Leafland and around the NHL. A couple big newsy items. Today, we had Trevor Zegras traded from Anaheim to Philadelphia for a second, a fourth, and Ryan Poehling. So Philly adding a young, talented player hoping to rebound. So I thought that was a very interesting move. Another young, talented player that could be on the way out of Toronto is Mitch Marner. And there was some rumblings over the weekend about maybe the structure of deal that Marner could be looking for this summer. Pierre LeBrun reporting, Dave, that Marner is considering his camp, considering possibly as short as a 2-year term. Is that surprising to you that he's hitting the free agent market? And given how volatile his playoff performances have been, does it surprise you that he'd be willing to take a 2-year deal to bet on himself?
Well, that is a bit of the surprising part, is like the cap is going up a significant amount. Teams have cap space to operate with to give him a pretty sizable deal. But I think it's kind of a twofold thing. I think one, maybe there's a team that doesn't have as much cap space now, and maybe later down the road, they have a little more room to give him what he wants. I don't get the 2-year, and sometimes I don't get when the players do the 7-year deals. Like, I think what Austin Matthews did remains what most players should strive to do, right? You do a 4 or 5-year deal, you still get decent chunk of change, and you go back out and you get another chance to sign another 4 or 5-year deal and get potentially even more money with the cap that's going up. So 2 years doesn't, I know what that means. By the end of the 2 years, the cap will be at an even higher rate. And so that's probably where he's thinking, like, I can just show what I'm worth and really lock in on a really good deal. And at 31, you're still able to get a half decent deal.
Yeah.
But 2 years, I don't know what team is going to want to say, yeah, we'll do 2 years. And maybe in 2 years, we might lose you. Like, I don't know. Teams don't necessarily want to do 2 years for a superstar.
See, that's funny because I feel like this. If I were the Leafs, I feel as though a 2-year deal for Marner would interest me more than a long-term deal for Marner. And I would think that most teams feel that way because he's an interesting player, like great in the regular season, but what can you give me in the playoffs? And if you're, the teams reportedly who are kind of leading the race for Marner right now, LeBrun was reporting it's Vegas, Dallas, and LA. The Kings also very interested in bringing in Mitch Marner, along with Carolina and Columbus is interested, but those three apparently are top of mind for Marner if he leaves Toronto. And if I'm any of those teams, I kind of would rather a short-term deal with Marner. If that means paying him more down the line, okay, so be it. Like I said, cap's going up to 113 million. Like if you keep it at the same percentage of cap, he's going to make more money, of course, but you're still keeping it the same cap percentage in 2 years. But I look at it and think to myself, like, okay, Mitch Marner, he has not performed in Toronto in the playoffs. What is the guarantee that he performs in the postseason for me? I don't know if there is a guarantee. So do I really want to lock into 6-7 years with this player and get 6-7 years of disappointment, just like there was for the Maple Leafs organization when he got to the postseason? Or do I roll the dice, see what happens in 2 years? If it works out, great. If you become a playoff performer in 2 years, great. We've got boatloads of cap space at that point. We can get something done and keep around long term if it works out. But if it doesn't, and he just continues to show postseason dud performances like he's done over the course of the last few years here in Toronto, now you're not locked in long term. You can get out of that situation after a couple of years and move into a different direction. I actually think a 2-year deal is perfect for both Marner, again, who can bet on himself and make more money 2 years from now when the cap goes up. But if I'm an NHL franchise, I also would probably prefer to just get a short 2-year deal to see how it all plays out.
My issue with that is the relationship at this point salvageable? Because
I don't mean Toronto, I just mean any team in general.
Yeah. I think for Toronto's case, I think now this means more. It has more to do with is the situation salvageable? And for Mitch, I mean, look, if a team is just not as willing to give you that long-term deal, yeah, then say I'll take a short-term deal. I'll take whatever deal you want to give me, right? Because I believe in myself that much that I'll bet on myself. Like if you're a player, you got to show a little bit of a desire to get away from the norm. And I don't think he's going to sign for the max 7 years either. I don't think he wants to do that. I think he wants to leave some sort of flexibility, in my opinion.
Doesn't this kind of show, though, that like Marner's all about the money?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if he takes a literal 2-year deal, again, this is only if he does this, but if he takes a 2-year deal, it is with the intention, because when the cap's going to jump from 95.5, where it's at right now, it's going to jump all the way up to 113.5 million. So you're talking an extra $18 million that this cap is going to increase over the next 2 years. He is going to be looking to cash in 2 years now, knowing that if it goes up that much and the market gets reset, because Connor gets a new extension, Kirill Kaprizov gets a new extension at that point, like the AAV on these superstar players are going to go up, and no longer can people look at Marner and say like, oh, he's not worth more than McDavid. McDavid only makes X amount of money. How could he possibly get 14? He might not get 14 right now. But if he signs a deal for 12 and a half on a 2-year term this year, and then it performs well, he could get 14, 15 million per season on a 7-year deal the next time he comes around and is due. Whereas he might not be able to make that much money 7 years from now if he goes to sign another 2-year deal at the end of his career. So I think he looks at it almost as like he's got like a 10-year window basically to play, a 9-10-year window to play. How can I maximize that that money? And this probably is the best way to do it. I think we see a lot of players sign 2-year contracts specifically this year, and I think a lot of players
already. Gavrikov with LA,
and
he's in. He like you're looking at the defense market, not looking so good. Gavrikov, he gets a bit of a not only pick of where he wants to go, but he'll likely make more than what he done in his last deal because he decided, you know what, I'm going to go to a good team in LA, reasonable deal that he got, play 2 years, battle myself, and guess what? Now I'm in line for another pretty good payday.
Yep, exactly. And I think we'll continue to see that happen. So whether it's Orlov who's up for a new deal, maybe he gets something. Apparently, Aaron Ekblad is likely to be moving on. I think in the Chris Johnston show had mentioned that it's likely Ekblad and Florida depart, which maybe that means Marchand is more likely to stick around if that happens. Ivan Provorov, could he be looking to do a similar thing on the defensive market? Brock Besser as a forward, could he be looking at a shorter term deal to land himself something nice a couple of years from now? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things kind of fall out for free agency. But hearing that Marner is one of the guys interested in a shorter term deal to really cash in 2 years from now and that cap grows an extra 18 million, I don't think he would be the only player trying to do stuff like that. There's a lot more to get into. It was kind of a busy weekend. We might have to kind of put a pin on this for now and get into more of it tomorrow. There were some notes on Matthew Nyes and possibly what's going on with his contract, the likelihood of him signing before July 1. A couple of players the Maple Leafs might be eyeing in free agency. So some stuff to get into tomorrow. And apparently James Myrtle believes that if the Leafs wanted to make a trade, it's not the forward market, it's not the goalie market. Maybe they'd be looking to move a defenseman off their blue line. We can get into that report tomorrow. But that'll do it for us here today in the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You could subscribe to the Locked On at Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the Leafs, the Locked On Leafs channel as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.